What if 45 ancient myths weren't just stories, but terrifying truths? These tales, passed down for generations, hide real horrors, events so shocking they were transformed into legends. In this video, we'll reveal the spine-chilling truths behind these myths, uncovering disasters, betrayals, and survival that history tried to bury. The line between myth and reality is thinner than you think. Brace yourself, because what's coming next will change everything you thought you knew. Chapter 1. The Tower of Babel, a collapse of civilization. The Tower of Babel was said to be a colossal structure that reached the heavens, only to be struck down by divine wrath. But what if this wasn't just a myth, but a real event? A disaster that marked the fall of an entire civilization. Some historians believe that Babel's destruction was caused by an earthquake, shaking the very foundation of the city. The Grand Tower, built by ambitious rulers, could have crumbled in an instant, taking with it not just a building, but the dreams of a people. But this wasn't just the collapse of a tower, this was the fall of an entire civilization. The Babylonians, renowned for their grandiosity, had no idea that their ambitions would provoke nature's fury. The truth is, they underestimated the forces of the earth beneath their feet. The Tower of Babel wasn't just a story of divine retribution. It was the devastating reality of human ambition turned to dust. But this wasn't the only myth born from catastrophic disasters. What if another myth was hiding an even darker truth? Chapter 2. Atlantis, a city that sank beneath the sea. The myth of Atlantis tells of a grand civilization that vanished beneath the waves in a single day and night. Could this be based on the eruption of Thera, which obliterated the Minoan civilization? The eruption was so powerful that it triggered massive tsunamis, wiping out islands and civilizations in an instant. Atlantis, once thought to be a utopia, may have been a tragic victim of nature's fury. But this wasn't just the sinking of a city, it was the annihilation of an entire world. The Minoans, with their advanced technology and culture, had no way of knowing that the Earth's wrath would consume them. The tale of Atlantis wasn't just a fantastical fable, it was the brutal truth of a society destroyed by forces they couldn't control. But the destruction didn't stop with Atlantis. Another myth arose from the tombs of ancient Egypt, where death itself was unleashed. Chapter 3. The Curse of the Pharaohs, Poisonous Tombs. The curse of the pharaohs claimed the lives of those who disturbed the tombs of Egypt's most famous rulers, especially King Tutankhamun. But was the curse truly supernatural, or could it have been a deadly trap set within the tombs themselves? Experts suggest the tombs were filled with toxic mold and gases, fatal to anyone who entered without proper precautions. But this wasn't just a superstition, it was a deadly reality. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb led to a series of mysterious deaths, which many attributed to the curse. What they didn't realize was that the real killer was a toxic environment waiting for the unsuspecting. The curse of the pharaohs wasn't a myth. It was a biological weapon in disguise, a hidden danger meant to protect the sacred and keep the dead undisturbed. But what other deadly forces have been hiding in plain sight, disguised as myths? One terrifying truth lies beneath the sea. Chapter 4. The Trojan Horse, a war tactic of deception. The Trojan horse, a gift from the Greeks to the Trojans, is one of the most famous symbols of deception in history. But what if this wasn't just a story of clever strategy? What if it was a chilling tactic of psychological warfare? The Greeks used fear and trust to infiltrate the city of Troy, leading to its ultimate downfall. The horse wasn't just a wooden structure, it was the beginning of a brutal massacre. What the Trojans didn't know was that they weren't just welcoming a gift, they were inviting their own destruction. As the Greeks hid inside, Troy's defenses were lowered, making them vulnerable to an attack that would leave the city in ruins. The Trojan horse wasn't just a clever ruse, it was a deadly act of war. showing how easily trust can be exploited to cause catastrophic damage. But the horror didn't end there. Another myth carries the terrifying truth of a bird that could rise from its ashes. Chapter 5. The Phoenix, a tale of rebirth from ashes. The phoenix, a mythical bird that is reborn from its ashes, symbolizes immortality and renewal. But what if the phoenix myth wasn't about magic? It was a reflection of real-life volcanic eruptions. The destruction of entire cities by volcanoes, followed by the rebirth of life in the aftermath, could be the source of this tale. The phoenix rise wasn't just symbolic, it was nature's terrifying cycle of death and renewal. The truth wasn't just about rebirth, it was about survival after devastation. When a volcano erupted, it obliterated everything in its path. But from the ashes, life began again, forcing survivors to rebuild. The phoenix wasn't just a creature of legend, it was a living metaphor for the cycle of destruction and survival, where every new beginning is born from the ashes of the old. But this wasn't the only myth born from destruction. Another terrifying truth lurked in the labyrinth beneath the earth. Chapter 6. The Minotaur, Ritual Sacrifice in the Labyrinth. The Minotaur, a half-man, half-bull beast trapped in the labyrinth, was said to devour those who entered. But what if this myth was a reflection of the Minoan practice of human sacrifice? The labyrinth may have been an underground chamber where the Minoans performed brutal rituals to appease their gods. The Minotaur wasn't just a creature, it was a symbol of fear and death within a society that lived in constant terror. What these sacrifices really represented was the chilling desperation of a civilization to keep their gods satisfied, no matter the cost. People were cast into the labyrinth as offerings, never to return. The Minotaur wasn't a monster. It was the reality of a culture that demanded blood for survival. And the labyrinth was just a trap for those unlucky enough to be chosen. But the Minoans weren't the only ones with a dark secret. Something more monstrous lay beneath the surface. Chapter 7. Cyclops, Giant Cannibals of the Sea. The Cyclops, one-eyed giants who devoured anyone who crossed their path, are legendary creatures in Greek mythology. But what if these Cyclops weren't mythical at all? Some believe these creatures were inspired by encounters with cannibalistic tribes or brutal warriors living on isolated islands. The real horror wasn't in their size, it was in the savagery they were willing to commit to survive. The Cyclops wasn't just a giant, it was the terrifying face of desperation, where human beings became monsters to sustain themselves. With no resources, no escape, they turned to cannibalism. What these giants really represented was a society so broken by hunger and isolation that they resorted to the most extreme, horrifying survival tactics. But the terror doesn't stop here. Another myth involves a flood that wiped out everything in its path. Chapter 8. The Flood, a Drowned World. The myth of a great flood that wiped out humanity is one of the most widespread across cultures. From Noah's Ark to the Epic of Gilgamesh, these stories all point to a cataclysmic event that left the earth submerged in water. But what if this flood wasn't a myth, but the real, ancient aftermath of an event like the sudden rise of the Black Sea? Rising sea levels could have swallowed entire civilizations in a matter of days. What survivors didn't know was that the flood wasn't just a myth, it was a global disaster that reshaped the earth. Cities, crops, and civilizations were lost beneath the waves, and those who survived had no choice but to carry their story forward. The flood myth wasn't a fantastical tale, it was the horrifying truth of how the earth itself turned against humanity in an unforgiving moment. But the flood wasn't the only supernatural phenomenon that terrorized the world. Something even darker was lurking in the wilderness. Chapter 9. The Wendigo, a spirit of hunger and madness. The Wendigo, a mythical creature that drives people to cannibalism, has been part of Native American folklore for centuries. But what if the Wendigo wasn't just a spirit, it was a symbol of extreme starvation and madness? In the harsh, unforgiving winters of the northern forests, survival sometimes meant resorting to the unthinkable. Those driven to desperation might have been pushed to commit the ultimate taboo, cannibalism. What they didn't realize was that hunger itself could twist the mind, turning even the most rational person into a monstrous version of themselves. The Wendigo wasn't a supernatural demon, it was the manifestation of human desperation. The Wendigo wasn't just a monster, it was a terrifying reflection of the human psyche pushed beyond its limits by the hunger of the wild. But what if there were even darker creatures lurking in the depths of the ocean? The Kraken may have been far more real than anyone imagined. Chapter 10. The Kraken, a giant beast from the deep. The Kraken, a legendary sea creature with tentacles that could drag entire ships to their doom, has been a source of fear for sailors for centuries. But what if the Kraken wasn't a mythical monster at all? Some believe the Kraken myth was inspired by the giant squid, a creature whose tentacles can reach lengths of 40 feet or more. The giant squid has been rarely seen by humans, but its sheer size and terrifying appearance were enough to send shivers down the spine of any sailor who dared to venture too far into the ocean. What these sailors didn't realize was that the Kraken wasn't a fantastical beast. It was a creature of nature, so large and powerful that it could easily sink ships and devour anything in its path. The Kraken was a manifestation of the raw terror that the sea inspired in those who faced its dangers without understanding its mysteries. As they ventured into the deep, sailors were often confronted with creatures that seemed too large, too alien to comprehend. These encounters, though rare, became distorted over time, evolving into the Kraken myth that would live on for generations. The true horror wasn't just in the creature itself. It was in the vast, unknown, and unforgiving world that lay beneath the surface, where no one was safe from nature's most monstrous creations. The Kraken wasn't just a legend, it was a terrifying reminder of how small and powerless humans are in the face of nature's vast oceanic depths. But this sea monster wasn't the only force lurking in the depths. Other creatures, born from the earth, would rise next to terrorize the ancient world. Chapter 11. The Gorgon, a Deadly Gaze. Medusa and her sisters, the Gorgons, are famous for their deadly gaze. Anyone who looked directly into their eyes would turn to stone. But what if this myth wasn't just a tale of supernatural creatures, but a terrifying reflection of the venomous snakes that existed in the ancient world? Medusa herself was said to have snakes for hair, and some historians believe this might have been a symbolic representation of a real, dangerous snake species, such as the viper, whose venom can paralyze and kill in seconds. What the ancient people didn't know was that the Gorgons weren't just creatures of fantasy. They were a direct reflection of humanity's fear of poisonous creatures that could strike without warning. In a world where venomous snakes were a common danger, it's no wonder that these deadly reptiles would become associated with an equally deadly myth. Medusa's ability to turn people to stone could have symbolized the paralysis caused by snake venom, which spreads through the bloodstream, freezing the body in its tracks. In the myth, Medusa's gaze was not just metaphorical. It was the frightening power of nature's deadliest creatures, a warning to those who dared to venture too close to the unknown dangers of the wild. The Gorgons were not simply mythical creatures, they were an embodiment of humanity's most primal fears, drawn from the venomous horrors that lurked just beyond the reach of the safe, civilized world. But the Gorgons weren't the only terrifying creatures that stalked the shadows. Another myth from ancient Greece reveals an even darker force. Chapter 12. The Sirens, Songs of the Sea. The sirens, with their beautiful, enchanting songs, have captivated sailors for centuries. According to legend, their songs lured sailors to their deaths, causing ships to crash into the rocks. But what if the sirens weren't mythical creatures at all? Some experts believe they were inspired by dangerous, toxic phenomena, like underwater currents or gases, that could cause disorientation and death in sailors who strayed too close to the coast. These deadly, unseen forces could have been mistaken for the songs of the sirens, whose seductive voices beckoned sailors to their doom. The truth is, the sirens weren't just women with magical powers. They were a personification of the dangerous elements of the sea, a constant reminder that the ocean was not a gentle force, but a deadly one. The song of the sirens might have been the eerie sound of winds whipping through rocks, or the haunting calls of unseen sea animals, distorted and amplified by the wind and the sea. What sailors didn't realize was that their fatal attraction to the sirens wasn't about being seduced. It was about being caught in the probable, unpredictable, lethal forces of nature. These natural hazards were the real sirens, and they could drive anyone to their death without a moment's warning. The sirens weren't a myth. They were a terrifying reflection of the power the sea held over those who dared to cross it, always ready to claim the unwary. But the sirens weren't the only myth hiding deadly truths. A creature even more dangerous lurked in the remote mountain ranges, waiting to claim its victims. Chapter 13. The Loch Ness Monster, a creature from the deep. The Loch Ness Monster, a serpent-like creature that has allegedly haunted the waters of Scotland's Loch Ness for centuries, is one of the most famous myths in the world. But what if Nessie, as she's affectionately called, was based on a real prehistoric creature? Some believe the Loch Ness Monster could be a descendant of the plesiosaur, an ancient marine reptile that lived millions of years ago. The Loch Ness, with its deep, murky waters, would provide a perfect hiding place for such a creature, where it could evade detection. What those who searched for Nessie didn't realize was that the Loch Ness Monster wasn't some mythical sea serpent. It was an ancient relic, a survivor of a lost world, trapped in a lake where the stories of its existence were transformed into legends. Ancient and powerful creatures like the plesiosaur might have evolved to survive in the hidden depths of Loch Ness, out of sight and out of mind. The Loch Ness Monster wasn't just a creature from myth, it was a forgotten relic of a prehistoric age, hiding in the deep waters, a reminder of the ancient creatures that once roamed the earth and sea. But the Loch Ness Monster wasn't the only creature of ancient origin to haunt the earth. Far darker forces stirred in the mountains, waiting to bring terror to those who dared to seek them. Chapter 14. The Yeti, the Beast in the Snow. The Yeti, also known as the Abominable Snowman, is said to roam the snowy peaks of the Himalayas. But what if the Yeti wasn't just a creature of legend? Some believe the Yeti could be a real, undiscovered species of ape or large primate that lived in the remote mountains, surviving in isolation for centuries. Early explorers who ventured into the mountains may have seen this creature, whose towering form and thick fur were perfectly suited to the harsh environment of the Himalayas. What those explorers didn't realize was that the Yeti wasn't a monster. It was an ancient relic of evolution, a creature adapted to the cold, unforgiving landscape of the mountains. The Yeti's elusive nature could have made it difficult to capture or study, and sightings of the creature were often dismissed as myths. However, as technology and exploration advanced, the possibility of the Yeti being a real species couldn't be completely ruled out. The Yeti wasn't a mythical beast. It was a creature that adapted to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth, hidden away in the snow and ice, waiting for discovery. But the Yeti wasn't the only ancient creature still lurking in the wild. Deep in the forests, another terrifying beast was waiting to emerge. Chapter 16. The Manticore, a creature of despair. The manticore, a fearsome beast with the body of a lion, a human face, and a deadly tail, has terrorized the imagination for centuries. But what if the manticore was more than just a legend? Some believe the creature was based on a real animal, like a giant, ferocious lion or an ancient warrior's grotesque trophy, exaggerated over time. Its human face could be a distorted reflection of the fearsome warriors of the time. What those who feared the Manticore didn't realize was that the true terror wasn't just the beast, it was what it represented. The brutality of war, where fear and brutality became indistinguishable. The Manticore wasn't a mythical monster. It was a terrifying symbol of how violence, horror, and war could reshape everything into something monstrous. But the real terror didn't lie in the creatures alone. Hidden beneath the earth, another monstrous entity waited, ready to rise. Chapter 17. The Unicorn, a horned horse of purity. The unicorn, a majestic horse with a single horn on its forehead, has long been a symbol of purity and grace. But what if the unicorn wasn't just a creature of myth, but an animal inspired by real-life encounters with the Indian rhinoceros? Early travelers may have misinterpreted the rhinoceros's single horn as that of a magical creature, sparking the legend of the unicorn. What they didn't know was that the unicorn wasn't an ethereal being. It was a grounded, very real creature, seen through the eyes of those who could barely comprehend its reality. The unicorn wasn't just a mythical symbol, it was a misunderstood animal, turned into legend by the sheer wonder it inspired. But not all creatures from ancient times were misunderstood. Another terrifying tale from the past involves a giant beast lurking in the shadows. Chapter 18. The Cyclops, a reflection of ancient war. The Cyclops, giant, one-eyed monsters, are often considered mythical creatures. But what if they were based on the real, terrifying warriors of the ancient world? Some historians believe the Cyclops myths could stem from encounters with one-eyed soldiers or warriors who lost an eye in battle, their power and fearsome presence distorted into legend. What these warriors didn't realize was that their survival in battle created not just physical scars, but the transformation of their very identity into monstrous figures, immortalized in myth. The Cyclops wasn't a giant beast, it was a reflection of the brutal, violent world of ancient warfare, where warriors with one eye became legendary for their fierceness. But the warriors weren't the only ones to leave behind dark tales. Another legend arises from the depths of the sea. Chapter 19. The Wild Man. A savage force, the wild man, a beast-like human who roams the wilderness, has appeared in folklore across the world. But what if these stories were based on encounters with prehistoric humans, Neanderthals, or wild men who had been driven to the fringes of society? Their appearance and savage ways could have inspired the myth of the wild man. What these ancient people didn't know was that the wild man wasn't a myth. It was the ghost of a forgotten species, one that had once roamed the earth and survived by any means necessary. The wild man wasn't just a legend, it was a terrifying reminder of humanity's primal past, when survival depended on brutal instincts. But even wild men aren't as terrifying as what awaits us deep beneath the earth. Another myth was born from an age-old curse. Chapter 20. The Mummy's Revenge, an Ancient Vengeance. The curse of the mummy, especially the tale of King Tutankhamun, is one of the most infamous in history. It was believed that those who disturbed a pharaoh's tomb would face certain death. But what if the curse wasn't supernatural? Instead, could it have been caused by deadly toxins and mold found inside ancient tombs? The environment within these tombs was filled with poisonous substances, and those who entered without caution paid the price. What these tomb raiders didn't know was that they weren't facing a curse. They were facing the hidden dangers left to protect the dead from the living. The mummy's curse wasn't a myth. It was a deadly truth, a biological weapon designed to preserve the sanctity of the tombs and punish those who dared disturb them. But even curses could not compare to the horrors awaiting in the battlefields of ancient lands. Another myth stems from the chaos of war. Chapter 26. The Black Dog, a Demon in the Dark. The Black Dog, a terrifying phantom that haunts the night, is said to foretell death and misfortune. But what if the black dog was more than just a ghostly time apparition? Some believe it was a real, monstrous creature, a massive, shadowy dog or wolf, perhaps a remnant of ancient, larger predatory species. Its menacing presence wasn't supernatural. It was a living terror, lurking in the dark corners of the world, waiting to strike. What the people didn't realize was that the black dog wasn't a demon. It was a symbol of death and destruction, a physical manifestation of fear itself. The black dog wasn't just a mythical creature, it was an omen of the dangers that roamed the night, ready to pounce without warning. But the darkness held more than just dogs. Another horrific presence lingered, waiting to take control of its victims. Chapter 27. The Leviathan, a beast of the deep. The Leviathan, a monstrous sea creature, capable of swallowing ships whole, has terrorized sailors for centuries. But what if the Leviathan wasn't a creature at all? Some believe the myth originated from sightings of giant sea creatures like whales or massive squids, whose enormous size could easily be mistaken for something far more terrifying. These creatures lurked beneath the waves, waiting to strike fear into the hearts of anyone who dared to cross their path. What the sailors didn't know was that the Leviathan wasn't a mythical monster. It was nature's most terrifying predator, lurking in the depths of the ocean, unknown and unseen. The Leviathan wasn't a creature of legend. It was an ancient terror that swam beneath the surface, its immense size and strength sending shivers down the spine of anyone who encountered it. But the sea wasn't the only place where monsters lurked. In the forests, another myth was born from pure fear. Chapter 28. The Wild Hunt, a Ghostly Pursuit. The Wild Hunt, a ghostly procession of riders led by a spectral figure, is said to sweep across the skies, hunting souls. But what if this myth wasn't just a supernatural chase? Some believe it was based on real, ancient practices, rituals, and wars fought by powerful tribes, where the dead were honored in gruesome ceremonies. The Wild Hunt wasn't a mystical event. It was a terrifying reflection of ancient warrior cultures that believed in guiding souls into the afterlife. What the people didn't realize was that the Wild Hunt wasn't just a spectral chase. It was the deadly pursuit of souls and power, a terrifying reminder of how war and death were intertwined. The Wild Hunt wasn't a ghostly legend. It was a ritualized death march that echoed through history, stalking the land with ruthless intent. But the wild wasn't the only place where darkness reigned. Beneath the surface of the water, another deadly myth was waiting to rise. Chapter 29. The Nuckelavee, a water demon. The Nuckelavee, a terrifying water demon from Scottish folklore, is said to bring disease and death wherever it goes. But what if this demon was based on real creatures like mutated sea serpents or aquatic beasts that thrived in the dark, murky waters of ancient rivers? The Nuckelavee wasn't a supernatural being, it was a natural terror, one that lived in the hidden depths of the ocean and rivers, feeding off the fear and suffering of its victims. What people didn't realize was that the Nuckelavee wasn't a demon, it was a reflection of the dangers that lurked in the unseen parts of nature where no one was safe. The Nuckelavee wasn't a myth. It was a creature born of nature's darkest forces, stalking the land and spreading misery wherever it went. But even water demons weren't as deadly as the creatures that haunt the human mind, lurking deep in the shadows. Chapter 30. The Skinwalker, a transformation of evil. The Skinwalker, a shape-shifting witch capable of turning into any animal, is one of the most terrifying figures in Native American folklore. But what if this myth wasn't about supernatural abilities at all? Some historians believe the Skinwalker stories were based on real individuals who practiced dark magic, breaking the natural laws of their communities to gain power. These witches could supposedly transform into animals like wolves or coyotes to carry out dark deeds, hunting, spying, and even causing harm. In some cultures, it was believed that those who had mastered forbidden knowledge could take on the form of an animal, using this power to harm others or manipulate the world around them. The skinwalker wasn't simply an evil spirit, it was a human being, turning into something monstrous in their quest for power and control. What people didn't realize was that the skinwalker wasn't just a monster. It was a symbol of corruption and the dangers of meddling with the dark, hidden aspects of life. To become a skinwalker meant to lose one's humanity, slipping into something far worse than any natural creature. The skinwalker wasn't a mythical beast, it was a terrifying reflection of the human capacity for evil, showing what happens when the desire for power overtakes the very essence of being human. But the skinwalker wasn't the only creature born from fear. Something even more ancient and dangerous lurked beneath the surface. Chapter 31. The Night Marchers, Ancient Warriors in the Shadows. The Night Marchers, spectral warriors from Hawaiian mythology, are set to march through the night, their footsteps echoing in the silence, forever guarding their sacred land. But what if the Night Marchers weren't just ghostly spirits? They were real warriors, their memories and spirits forever entwined with the land they protected. These warriors, known for their fierce loyalty and brutal battle tactics, might have been so feared in life that their spirits were said to return after death, seeking revenge on those who trespassed. The legend goes that the Night Marchers could be heard from a distance, their war cries carried by the winds. Anyone who crossed their path was doomed to be killed, their life taken as punishment for disturbing the peace of these ancient guardians. But what if these spirits were, in fact, the lingering energy of ancient war, a manifestation of the brutality of their lives? What people didn't realize was that the Night Marchers weren't just ghostly figures. They were the unresolved anger of those who fought and died in battle, forever roaming the land, seeking retribution. The Night Marchers weren't supernatural beings, they were the spirits of warriors, never at rest, their anger and violence still echoing in the land they once fought to protect. But even the spirits of ancient warriors couldn't match the terror that lurked beneath the ocean's surface, waiting to claim its next victim. Chapter 32. The Kelpie, a shape-shifting water demon. The Kelpie, a shape-shifting water demon, is said to lure travelers to their doom, dragging them into the depths of the river. But what if the Kelpie wasn't just a demon, it was a deadly reminder of nature's unforgiving power? Some believe the Kelpie was inspired by real drownings caused by the swift and unpredictable currents of the rivers, or even the creatures lurking beneath the surface, predators capable of pulling an unsuspecting traveler to their death. The truth behind the Kelpie myth may lie in the harsh realities of survival near dangerous bodies of water. In a time when the forces of nature were largely unexplained and feared, the Kelpie became the personification of water's deadly grip, an inescapable force that took anyone foolish enough to get too close. What these travelers didn't realize was that the Kelpie wasn't a demon. It was the terrifying reality of water's power to drown, to take, and to kill without warning. The Kelpie's shape-shifting nature could have been rooted in the many mysterious creatures that lurked beneath the surface, waiting to strike. The Kelpie wasn't a mythical monster, it was the embodiment of the ocean's darkest forces, waiting to take the unwary. But even nature's terrors didn't compare to the darkness that lay buried deep within the earth, hidden from all eyes. Chapter 33. The Golem, a monster made of clay. The Golem, a creature made from clay and brought to life to protect its creator, has been a symbol of power and terror in Jewish folklore. But what if the Golem wasn't just a creature of magic, it was a desperate creation born from the fears and needs of its creator? In the stories, the Golem is brought to life by a rabbi who seeks to protect his community from harm. But as the Golem grows in power, it begins to lose control, eventually becoming a monster. The Golem might not have been a magical construct. It may have been a metaphor for the dangers of playing God and creating something too powerful to control. The very act of creating life from clay, a non-living material, could have symbolized the fear of crossing natural boundaries. What people didn't realize was that the golem wasn't just a protector, it was a warning. It was the terrifying consequence of human hubris. When man dares to control life itself, the result is often chaos. The golem wasn't a guardian. It was a terrifying reflection of mankind's deepest fears about power, control, and the unintended consequences of playing with forces beyond our understanding. But even the golem couldn't match the terror that awaited in the distant mountains, where the forgotten beast of legend still roams. Chapter 34. The Harpies. Foul women of the wind. The Harpies, winged women with sharp claws, were said to swoop down from the sky to carry off the souls of the dead or torment the living. But what if the Harpies weren't just mythical creatures? They were a reflection of the unpredictable, harsh winds that could devastate the ancient world. In a time when storms and natural disasters were often unexplained, the Harpies became the embodiment of nature's fury, sweeping across the land, taking with them everything in their path. What people didn't realize was that the Harpies weren't supernatural monsters. They were a metaphor for the terror that wind and storms could bring, as well as the punishment for those who crossed the gods. The storms, in their sudden ferocity, could rip through villages, tearing apart everything in their path, just as the Harpies ripped away life and hope. The Harpies weren't just myth, they were the storm itself, a reminder of how nature could take everything from you in an instant. But nature's fury wasn't the only thing to fear in ancient times beneath the earth. Something far darker and more powerful was waking. Chapter 35. The Werewolf, a Curse of the Moon. The myth of the werewolf, where a man transforms into a savage wolf under the full moon, has been part of European folklore for centuries. But what if the werewolf wasn't just a man cursed by the moon? It was a reflection of the mental and physical effects of rabies or other diseases. Rabid individuals often experience symptoms such as aggression, foaming at the mouth, and a loss of control, mirroring the violent transformations seen in werewolf legends. What people didn't realize was that the werewolf wasn't a supernatural creature. It was a terrifying reflection of the toll disease could take on the body, turning people into monsters through no fault of their own. The full moon, with its association with madness and the unknown, became the perfect setting for these transformations. The werewolf wasn't just a creature of legend, it was a chilling reminder of how fear and disease can turn people into something unrecognizable. The curse wasn't of the moon, it was of the mind and body, driven to madness by forces beyond control. But even the moon's curse wasn't as terrifying as what lurked in the forgotten corners of the earth. Something far more monstrous awaited. Chapter 36. The Skinwalker, a Transformation of Evil. The Skinwalker, a shape-shifting witch, capable of turning into any animal, is a terrifying figure in Native American mythology. But what if this myth was based on real people who practiced dark magic? Skinwalkers were said to use forbidden rituals to gain power over life and death, turning into animals to hunt or deceive. The shape-shifting wasn't supernatural. It was the work of individuals who had mastered terrifying powers. What the people didn't realize was that the Skinwalker wasn't a myth. It was a person willing to cross every boundary of morality, using evil to manipulate nature and gain power. The Skinwalker wasn't just a creature, it was the embodiment of human darkness, transforming into monsters to achieve their twisted goals. But even this terrifying shapeshifter couldn't compare to the horrors lurking in the sea. A monster waited, rising from the depths. Chapter 37. The Night Marchers, Ancient Warriors in the Shadows. The Night Marchers, spectral warriors who march through the night, are a haunting figure in Hawaiian mythology. But what if the Night Marchers were based on real warriors, long dead but not forgotten? Some believe the night marchers are the spirits of ancient Hawaiian soldiers who marched to avenge their fallen comrades, their footsteps shaking the earth. These spirits were so powerful that anyone who crossed their path would face certain death. What the people didn't realize was that the night marchers weren't just spirits, they were a legacy of war and vengeance, carried into the afterlife by the souls of those who fought and died. The night marchers weren't ghosts, they were the echoes of war, driven by the fury of those who were never given peace. But the spirits of the dead weren't the only things to fear. Another creature, more terrifying than any ghost, lurked in the shadows. Chapter 38. The Kelpie, a shape-shifting water horse. The Kelpie, a shape-shifting water horse, is said to lure travelers to their doom, dragging them into the depths of the Grapes-Purse River. But what if the Kelpie wasn't just a monster? Some believe the Kelpie was inspired by real animals, like horses that became trapped in dangerous waters, their forms distorted into something monstrous over time. The Kelpie wasn't a creature that appeared from the water. It was the water itself, claiming those who ventured too close. What these travelers didn't realize was that the Kelpie wasn't a supernatural being. It was a deadly trap set by the unpredictable forces of nature, waiting to pull them under. The Kelpie wasn't a myth. It was nature's most terrifying predator, hiding in the waters, ready to drown the unsuspecting. But this wasn't the only mythical creature lurking in nature's shadows. Another legend reveals the monstrous consequences of greed. Chapter 39. The Golem, a monster made of clay. The golem, a creature made from clay and brought to life to protect its master, is one of the most famous Jewish legends. But what if the golem wasn't just a creature of magic, but a dark warning? Some believe the golem was created from human fear and desperation, a living symbol of the lengths people would go to protect themselves from harm. It wasn't magic, it was the manipulation of nature and life itself. What the people didn't know was that the golem wasn't just a creature of clay, it was the manifestation of their own guilt and fears, brought to life with terrifying consequences. The golem wasn't a guardian, it was a monster that could never be controlled, made from the very fears that created it. But even the golem couldn't compare to the deadly curse that lingered in the earth's bones, a horrifying truth that would forever change mankind. Chapter 40. The Harpies, foul women of the wind. The Harpies, winged women with sharp talons, were said to torment and carry off those who displeased the gods. But what if these mythological creatures were based on something much more terrifying? Some believe the Harpies were a metaphor for storm winds, which were known to rip through villages and carry off anything in their path, leaving nothing but destruction. The women's claws were a symbol of nature's ability to tear apart everything in its wake. What the ancient people didn't realize was that the Harpies weren't women, they were the deadly, uncontrollable forces of nature, taking and destroying without mercy. The Harpies weren't monsters, they were the storms, the winds, and the natural forces that could change everything in an instant. But these winds were only one example of nature's raw power. A far darker force was stirring beneath the surface, waiting to strike. Chapter 41. The Kelpie, a shape-shifting water demon. The Kelpie, a terrifying water demon that lures victims into its watery grave, has haunted Scottish folklore for centuries. But what if the Kelpie wasn't just a demon, it was a deadly reminder of nature's unforgiving power? Some believe the Kelpie was inspired by real drowning tragedies, where the victims were dragged under by violent water currents, their bodies later transformed into a mythic figure. The river itself became a trap, and the Kelpie was the embodiment of that danger. What these victims didn't realize was that the Kelpie wasn't a supernatural creature. It was a relentless force of nature, waiting for the unwary to get too close. The Kelpie wasn't a legend. It was the terrifying truth about the waters that could swallow you whole, never to be seen again. But this water demon wasn't the only terror lurking beneath the surface. Another myth revealed a creature that lived in the heart of the earth. Chapter 42. The Tengu, Guardians of the Mountains. The Tengu, mythical bird-like creatures from Japanese folklore, are known to guard sacred mountainlands with unmatched fury. But what if the Tengu weren't mystical beings? They were real, human-like warriors who lived in isolation, fiercely protecting their lands. These mountain guardians, revered and feared by locals, might have been reclusive monks or warriors who practiced asceticism and deep spiritual rituals, blending with the natural world. What the people didn't know was that the Tengu weren't simply mythical guardians. They were real individuals, so entwined with their environment that they became legends, their actions viewed as otherworldly. The Tengu weren't supernatural. They were the warriors and hermits who lived on the edge of society, guarding sacred places with terrifying power. But even these powerful protectors had nothing on the monsters that lurked in the night, a creature that could blend in with the shadows. Chapter 43. The Jiangshi, a vampire from China. The Jiangshi, an undead creature that sucks the life force from its victims, has long been a terrifying figure in Chinese folklore. But what if the Jiangshi wasn't a vampire? It was the result of a disease, like rabies or plague, that caused people to behave violently and uncontrollably. Victims of these diseases could exhibit strange behavior, like foaming at the mouth or lurching forward, causing them to be mistaken for the undead. What people didn't realize was that the Jiangshi wasn't a supernatural monster. It was the horrifying reality of disease and death, manifesting in a way that turned the living into something terrifying. The Jiangshi wasn't a vampire. It was a chilling reminder of the diseases that could turn the living into monsters. But the Jiangshi wasn't the only horror tied to the undead. A more terrifying curse followed those who crossed the wrong path. Chapter 44. The Golem, a monster of clay. The golem, a clay creature brought to life to serve its creator, is a haunting tale in Jewish folklore. But what if the golem wasn't a magical entity? It was a creation born from desperation and fear. Some believe the golem was crafted to protect against real, tangible threats, like the danger of persecution or violence. Its lifeless form, animated by magic or dark ritual, symbolized the lengths people would go to when cornered. What people didn't know was that the golem wasn't a supernatural guardian. It was a creation born from human anxiety and the desire for control over an uncontrollable world. The golem wasn't a monster. It was a reflection of human fear and the consequences of playing with forces beyond understanding. But the golem wasn't the only creature to be born from fear. Another monster, far more ancient, waited to unleash its terror on the world. Chapter 45. The Giant of Patagonia, a legendary encounter. The Giant of Patagonia, said to be a towering figure of unimaginable size, has been a legend for centuries. But what if the Giant of Patagonia wasn't a myth at all? Some explorers claim to have encountered these giants in South America, possibly ancient members of a large, physically imposing indigenous group. Their massive size and strength were misinterpreted as supernatural, cementing their place in legend. What these explorers didn't realize was that the Giant of Patagonia wasn't a monstrous creature. It was a reflection of the awe and fear that different cultures can evoke when they meet. The Giant of Patagonia wasn't a myth. It was a cultural encounter, transformed into legend by the explorers' misunderstanding and fear. Final payoff. These myths weren't just stories. They were the terrifying truth about the ancient world, where the line between reality and legend blurred in ways we can barely comprehend. The myths weren't invented. They were born from the darkest moments of human history, where survival and fear gave rise to creatures and forces that continue to haunt us today.